All right, here is game 3 for the Saemisch is white, and we're black playing the King's Indian. And we don't have a lot of time. This video's gone a little longer than I meant to. So we're just going to run through this really quick. And this actually wasn't even a 3-minute game. This is one of my 2-minute games. Definitely, we only want to look at the opening, see if it was a success. And in 2 minutes, I mean, these games, you run out of time very quickly, can get all spicy and go a little crazy. And nothing wrong with that, just that the quality of play goes down. Not that it's not a lot of fun. All right, but let's get going into the Saemisch, right? And we're talking about move 5 for white against the King's Indian. They have a lot of choices, but this video we're looking at when they play F3 Saemisch, who was a fantastic player, by the way, from I think the 20s and 30s and 40s, and officially got the title of Grandmaster in the 1950s. 1950, I think, as a matter of fact. So it took a while for him to get the Grandmaster title. But back then, that's when they started awarding Grandmaster titles for the first time. So he was one of the earlier Grandmasters, officially. All right. Very solid, but a little bit slow system for white. And normally I just castle. They play bishop e3, makes sense, right? We've talked about this after they play f3, and now the bishop is kind of protected from any annoyance, any harassing by the knight, if you will. All right. Here I decided to play knight c6, which the computer doesn't even like that much, which is one of the book moves, though, to play. But it's not the main book move. I kind of like playing knight c6, but I also play a lot of, and it is a big choice, c6. c6 is one of the main moves instead of putting the knight there. And this is very simple because you are kind of fighting back against white's center a little bit. You're making it hard for them to put a big piece there, and yes, their pawns can still go forward, of course. But more importantly, you're opening up a line for your queen to have access to a5. Since they are playing the Saemisch, not everyone who plays the Saemisch as white castles queenside, but it is a big option. And when I used to play the Saemisch, because I used to be a d4 player a million years ago, hundreds of years ago, I did a lot of castling long and try to do the pawn storm. It was a lot of fun. But when castling queenside, all it takes really is a queen on a5, pushing up a b-pawn, maybe get a bishop to e6. You already have this amazing dragon bishop. And before you know it, black can get a lot of pressure because after b5 with a pawn, it's very hard for white not to get an open line, either the b line or the c line. Usually one of these two lines gets open for black. So if they're going to castle long, if white's going to castle long, you just want to put pressure on the queen side and get a line open, or at least prepare to get a line open, and c6 does this. Not only does it prepare b5, which a6 would do too, but a6 doesn't let the queen get to a5. And as we've talked about before, this knight still has places it can go. That it can go. So this is actually very useful, even if c6 is taken away. And against this very strong center, the knight on c6 is not always that helpful, though I do play it there a lot, so I don't mind it at all. All right, so other choices besides knight c6 on move number 6 for black, and c6, well, we already said a6, so it's a different version. You're kind of leaving c6 open for the knight. You're thinking about it, but you are kind of signaling to white, go ahead, put your queen in d2, try to castle long, and I will play a quick b5. And again, I don't mind losing a queenside pawn, giving up a pawn, as long as I'm opening up lines against their king. Definitely worth it. So you can play a little a6. It also takes away b5 very quickly, just in case for later in the game. Many times in the later game, the middle game, this knight might go here and put pressure on black's position, especially if they castle kingside, which sometimes some players do, and then they'll play d5 and c5 with a rook behind that c-pawn maybe, and they'll start to use their snowplow effect on the queen side. So that is a very legitimate idea. One of the main lines here, and we've talked about e5 versus c5, striking back in the center on the dark squares. One of the main ideas is playing c5. Doing this after they play their f3, bishop e3, the Saemisch line. You hit a quick c5. And this actually brings you back to many of the dragon Sicilian ideas. Both pawn structures and piece placement, and it's amazing how many openings can kind of go and change into each other, kind of morph. In chess, this is called transpose. So this is a King's Indian, a d4 opening, and it can transpose into Dragon Sicilian, an e4 opening. And you would think d4 opening, e4 opening. They have to be totally different. Not at all sometimes. So if you play c5, this exchange, which is very possible, of d-pawn and c-pawn, is very much a dragon Sicilian. And you play this as black because you're trying to keep your dragon bishop strong. You're not trying to block it up by playing e5. Though many times I do like the e5 method better. That's how I play it. And I have tried c5 too. They're both excellent. So when I play knight c6, it's really because I am going to follow up with an e5, which does block the dragon bishop. But I also think it does stabilize the center. But because white is playing a slower system, and this f3, bishop e3, queen d2, very slow system, the Saemisch, you can now play c5. And you're not worried about things like decapturing, because you can play queen a5 very quickly. You can also just capture back and lose a pawn, because black is actually very much further ahead in development. So you're not worried about queen trades by itself. But I like the spicier version of if they capture, we play over. And this might unleash knights, and bishops. And again, you're going to take and play, follow up with knight c6 to also attack. So you're not worried about their bishop being on d4, aiming at your dragon bishop, if this capture does take place, because you will now have a knight and attack that bishop. Many times, if white doesn't play forward or captured, they'll play their knight g to e2 very quickly, because they want to capture back in the center then with the knight. So they're not scared about knight c6, right, attacking this pawn or this square, because they have their own knight that will follow up. So they could play here, and let's say we take, now they take with the knight, and now knight c6 is threatening a knight trade. Big threat. But the idea is basically because in this position, if black takes, they kind of want to take with the bishop, right? That kind of aims at our bishop and kind of holds our dragon bishop back. But we could simply play knight c6, and now we can take that bishop if they leave it there. If they run away, then why did they let this happen? And that would be very much a dragon Sicilian if this trade takes place. All the same ideas as the dragon Sicilian. But in this game, most people would play knight ge2, and now we can play queen a5, and you'll notice black's actually very active and much further ahead in development. This bishop is trapped, so they're not going to castle this way. We already have a queen on the queen side, so we dare them to castle that way. We can still do this trade. They haven't played d5 yet, which would take away from our knight, but they still could play that, that's true. But now we have a very nice lever. Our lever now is b5. We can actually play b5 very quickly and mess up their pawns because the knight is pinned and can't take. Basically a sacrifice, but we're ahead of development. Or we could play a6 and then b5, really pressuring the queen side, especially if they play d5. So black is doing fine here. This is very much a normal setup that can happen in the King's Indian, where you almost switch over to his dragon Sicilian if you play c5. So I played knight c6, and the last thing we could have done is you could always just play e5 right away. It's one of the reasons why you castle early. So your rook protects the queen. You're not worried about a queen trade. And you're not worried about capture, a little more capturing. And you're not worried about the knight actually going forward and trying to get your c-pawn. You're not. Because you can stop this very easily. If they play knight forward, right, because they have a c-pawn, you can play knight a6 easily, and that always defends c7 and develops your knight. And no matter which way to go with the knight, you can always play c6 next move after you protect c7. You can play c6 the next move, and that will always chase the knight. It'll always question the knight. Get off my side. What are you doing here? And totally equal, totally okay. If anything, black's development's actually a little bit better. And this pawn, though white has a little more space, which is normal in most games, right? The first turn advantage means a little more space, does take away from their bishop. So we play c6, we can play knight a6, we can play bishop e6, which pressures here. Our rooks will be very happy. We're already controlling this file. Our bishop is behind the pawn, but this really controls and holds back a lot of white, along with this pawn on c6. Black is totally 100% okay here, as far as I'm concerned. All right, so just a little bit more. Let's just show some moves, just so you can kind of see what I did here. And this is very typical. And they played bishop h6 right away. They want to trade the bishops. Caveman attack. But as you can tell, the computer doesn't like that, and it is a totally equal game. Now, why was the this be the case? And this will be the last thing we talk about because I have to end this video. And that is the fact that f3 and moving so many pawns and then moving queen and bishop a second time. This is slow. This is a lot of moves. Notice 1, 2, 3, and castling developed 4. And we are ready to play c6, maybe make a trade. Queen can come out, or bishop, even though it can't go to most of these squares, is controlling a lot of territory. It can still go to bishop d7. You just have to make sure you don't lose the d-pawn easily unless you have a lot of counterattack, which is always nice. But to trade here takes, you know, this bishop goes 1, 2, 3. That's 3 moves to get that bishop. Besides, you need to move the queen to be behind it to make sure you protect the bishop. And then you're also playing f3 to take away a square to, again, protect your bishop. So this is slow in a lot of moves. And black always has this built-in f5, which in this type of structure, though solid for white, white's pawns are not really moving forward anymore. They're kind of locked for the most part. Black, though, has f5 and can either take more space with f4, or they're in control of when to capture and open up the f line. Even with the king here, if black controls the king side better, they're not as worried about losing that dragon bishop. And again, when you play the e5 line, many times this bishop becomes not as useful anymore, so I don't mind the trade. All right, so they played bishop h6, and just a couple more moves to show what I did. I wanted to play f5 rather, move my f-pawn, they take. They played g4 trying to stop my f5. I still play it anyway. And we'll kind of stop here for a moment. I'll just talk about one thing and then we'll be done. And that is, I'm not worried about trades here. As a matter of fact, most players take at least with the g-pawn, right? G takes, G takes. That is what most players do right away. Just open up the line. But I'm not worried about that, right? Because my king will hide in the corner. And even after those captures, where are they? G takes, G takes. My king will hide in the corner. I can still go forward, which locks down the king side, by the way. My rook can now go to the G line. I have knights, which can control the king side. My bishop already helps control the king side. And once I get a rook on G8, sometimes I can get both rooks, both rooks on a G line, or even get a queen over here somewhere. And I'm the one, even though they open up the G line, I'm the one who does all the play on the king side. And if they castle queen side, well, it's going to take them a little bit to get going on the queen side, and their king is over here. Do they want to open up this area with their king over here and open it up where the, you know, facing their king? Usually the answer is no, though that sometimes happens. They'll castle long and hide with their king and then try to expand on the queen side. But I've already taken over the king side, and I can infiltrate, hopefully, on the king side, down the G line especially. Queen in front of the pawn, like if I get the queen to h4 very quick and I get a couple of rooks on the G line and I can lock everything down with my f-pawn going forward, black actually does very well. All right, we're all done. I think this is an opening success. And again, this is Coach Aaron out. Try the King's Indian. Get your hands on the pieces. Coach Aaron out. Peace.